Hello everyone. Today's case is yet another viewer-recommended case, as many of the ones I've been covering recently. However, this case took me down a complete rabbit hole because I may have found a connection to another missing Indigenous woman. And it made me wonder, could this individual be connected to the many suspected serial killers that could be working the Highway of Tears that have been causing Indigenous women to disappear over the decades? And by the end of this video, I'd like to know what you think. 20-year-old Shae-Lynn McAllister would last be seen in Fairview, Alberta, a small town of 2,800 people located 82 kilometers southwest of Peace River and 115 kilometers north of Grand Prairie. She is also from the Horse Lake First Nation. Shae-Lynn was described as a happy, sweet, vibrant, friendly, and helpful young woman who loved to draw and be around friends and family. However, she was also said to be gullible. Shae-Lynn attended high school in Hinds Creek and played basketball for the Hinds Creek Tigers, being awarded twice for her skills. During high school, Shae-Lynn would also fall in love with a young man, and the two would go on to have a son and a daughter. But due to this, Shae-Lynn would end up not finishing high school and instead decided to go into the workforce to help support her family. Unfortunately, after drug use was introduced to the relationship, Shae-Lynn would end up separating from the father of her children, his mother taking over the care of the children in November of 2018. From what's been said, the father of Shae-Lynn's children seemed to have gone out east to work on himself, where Shae-Lynn ended up staying locally so that she could work on reestablishing her life while the children stayed with their grandmother at a stable home. However, she actually lived 30 minutes away from where her children were staying, and she didn't have a vehicle, so she tried as often as she could whenever she could get a ride to go see her children, but it seems like she didn't get to see them as often as she would have wanted to. In 2019, Shae-Lynn began working at an A&W restaurant in Fairview. Her living situation at this point was still unstable. There's mentions of her living at the Grand Hotel in Fairview, but she was also allegedly renting with a roommate somewhere. In January of 2019, it said that Shae-Lynn ended up visiting a doctor for her panic attacks that she was having. And this was all after she had had an episode where she had cut off her hair because she thought there was bugs in it and she was worried about sores. It also seemed like she was scared her kids would get sick. So she had all of these fears that were happening, allegedly possibly due to her substance abuse issues. Around the time of her disappearance, she seemed to have started to get better. However, she was still struggling with her addictions. Unfortunately, this is something that we have often been talking about in these cases. Addictions aren't only issues with our Indigenous communities, but in rural areas of Canada in general, it seems. And sadly, when addictions are involved, the case tends to not be talked about or covered as much. According to the RCMP, on July 4th of 2019, Shae-Lynn was last seen leaving her job at A&W around 10:35 p.m. She had been working at the A&W for around 3 months at this point. She was later seen at a Shell gas station around 11:22 p.m., which was around a 6-minute walk away from her work. Keep in mind, this gas station also has a liquor store attached to it, as you can see here on the screen. And oddly enough, the gas station is also right across the street from an RCMP station. I couldn't find a description of what Shae-Lynn was last seen wearing. However, if she did go to the gas station after leaving A&W, I would assume that she possibly could have been wearing her work uniform, because I'm sure A&W probably has like a standard work uniform like a McDonald's or something would have. But as I said, there's no official description of what she was wearing. In the days following, it said that family and friends tried to contact Shae-Lynn. On July 6th, a friend would attempt to contact her via Facebook Messenger, saying, and I quote, "Where you at, sis? I haven't seen ya," end quote. The following day, the friend again messaged Shae-Lynn on Facebook Messenger saying, and I quote, "Thanks for letting me stay at your place. I didn't really get to see ya. Hopefully you're doing fine. Love you," end quote. By July 10th, the friend again messaged Shae-Lynn saying, and I quote, "Shae-Lynn, if you're all right, send me a message back. We're worried about you," end quote. On July 12th, Shae-Lynn's mother-in-law would end up posting on Facebook asking if anyone had seen Shae-Lynn. And after this, she would end up finally being reported missing. July 14th, the friend again tried to contact Shae-Lynn on Facebook Messenger, this time saying, and I quote, "I love you, Shae-Lynn. I hope you're all right," end quote. However, Shae-Lynn didn't respond to anyone after July 4th, so all of these messages were left unread, which this was said to be completely out of character for Shae-Lynn. She was always in contact with her friends and family despite her struggles. So of course, this caused concern to rise in all of her friends and family. It also became even more concerning when Shae-Lynn didn't show up to work and she also didn't collect her check. Family and friends began to search for Shae-Lynn and try to figure out any answers of where she may have disappeared to or what may have happened to her. Interestingly enough, a box would end up being found in her belongings that contained a list of her passwords and login information for things such as her social medias and her bank account. which is honestly a very smart thing to do in case you go missing. But if you are going to do something like that, make sure you hide that information in a spot or leave it with someone you trust so that it's not used for like nefarious reasons. But I say that that's important because we often see in cases that police can't access people's social medias or their bank account information without warrants of some kind or some kind of reasoning that, you know, the social media network is going to need. And a lot of times the owners of these social media networks don't want to just give up the information because they want to protect the privacy of their users. So they usually put up a fight to give this information to police, which could prolong things. And there could be evidence and information on things such as to see maybe where they last made a purchase or who the last person they were talking to was. And information like that could help lead to them being found or saved or convicting someone who did something to someone. However, again, a lot of times it takes a long time for this information to be found or even be collected if it ever is. So if family is able to access this and has these passwords and stuff, then that could be given to the police easily. So the family ended up finding this information, and of course they went and logged into Shae-Lynn's bank account, and unfortunately they noticed that Shae-Lynn also hadn't used her bank account since July 4th. Again, they went and looked on her social medias as well, and July 4th was the last date she was active anywhere, talked to anyone, was last seen. I did see, however, that she had last used her Facebook around 11 p.m. the night she disappeared, and the last purchase on her bank account was also around 11 p.m., assumingly at the gas station. So something happened to her after that kind of time frame where she was at that gas station. What happened to her after that? That's the big question. The RCMP was said to go on to question an unknown number of individuals, and they also began looking at security cameras around the area, which is how I want to assume they ended up getting the timestamps of when she left work and was last seen at the gas station, because that information of those specific times wasn't made public until more recently. But that's honestly the only information that we really have on Shae-Lynn's disappearance. It's not much. But there is a very prevalent rumor that has been going around and talked about. So there's allegedly this recording of an unnamed individual who claimed in the recording that Shae-Lynn ended up leaving that gas station and then heading over to a party in an area of town that was quite rough and known for drug use. And it's claimed that at this party, Shae-Lynn ended up ODing and her body would end up being hidden in the woods. In another alleged version, Shae-Lynn was beaten to death. However, after Shae-Lynn's body was allegedly hidden in these woods, the unnamed individuals, unknown individuals even at this point, ended up apparently moving her body again after people started talking, and this time they moved her body to a pig farm. And there was apparently 2 pig farms in the area, one that was abandoned, and there was another one that was still running and in use. It seems like nothing ended up being found at the abandoned pig farm, and for one reason or another, they were unable to search the one that was still up and running. The family would eventually end up being harassed by another unnamed individual who would repeatedly call the family claiming Shae-Lynn was alive and that they were talking and communicating with her. But of course, there was no evidence or proof that she actually was and that this person actually was with Shae-Lynn, and then eventually the calls ended up stopping. Another time, someone ended up calling the family, impersonating an RCMP officer, telling the family to stop searching for her. And we actually hear this quite often happening in missing persons cases. We've talked about it quite a few times, where for one reason or another, people start calling the family and telling them crazy things, telling them that their loved one was murdered in some violent, horrific way, or just basically prank calling them, telling them that, oh, we know where she is or he is, that they're in this location or that location. And they're just basically sending the family in this whole spiral of looking in these places that aren't even, real evidence, really. It's basically just wasting the family's time and putting them through a lot of stress and just emotional turmoil. And honestly, I don't really understand it. Maybe these people are just sick freaks that get off on torturing families like this, but it's honestly horrific. And it's just, not only is it hindering the investigation when people do stuff like that, but it's also just adding unnecessary stress and grief to the family who's already upset because their loved one is missing. Yeah, again, we hear this happening quite often. Shae-Lynn's mother, Trudy, would end up writing on Facebook, and I quote, "I keep praying someone is going to come forward with some information about my Shae-Lynn Skye McAllister. Please, I know somebody knows where or what happened to our Shae-Lynn. I'm begging you to make your statement to the RCMP." End quote. When it comes to Shae-Lynn's disappearance, in my opinion, I don't think she ran away. Now, whether she left the gas station and went somewhere on her own free will is a whole nother story because we have no evidence or proof of it. Again, we do have this rumor that has seemingly kind of been looked into by certain people about Shae-Lynn going to a party after leaving the gas station, which may be possible, but again, it's a rumor. I'm not sure what kind of evidence or proof there is of that. Maybe police know more than they're saying and they do have information about something like that, but I haven't seen anything, concrete, especially online about it. And Shae-Lynn has all the red flags of something bad happening to her just completely dropping off the face of the earth, never using her bank account again after that date, never contacting anyone on social media, not even picking up her check. If someone's disappearing, they need money to do that. And Shae-Lynn had money in her bank account that hasn't been touched. Again, she was an adult, so if she wanted to go off somewhere, she could. She could go off somewhere, she could use her bank account and not contact anyone again, and it is what it is. Adults have their own free will to do what they want. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening here. In my opinion, something happened to Shae-Lynn after leaving that gas station. Again, whether she went off to a party or went with someone willingly, or if maybe she tried to hitchhike a ride from the gas station, like we've seen in similar cases like this before as well. Because again, she didn't have a ride. Maybe she wanted to go somewhere, got into someone's vehicle who promised to take her there, and they could have taken her anywhere then. But my question is, who is involved? Because someone out there is involved, in my opinion, and they are still walking our streets. Now, scarily, Shae-Lynn isn't the only person in her family to have gone missing. On August 24th of 1988, Shae-Lynn's 19-year-old great-aunt, Roberta Ferguson, would disappear from a campsite near Chilliwack, British Columbia. Roberta was born on November 19th of 1968 as the youngest of 9 children and was part of the Dunvegan Beaver Band, living near Grimshaw, Alberta. Growing up, Roberta actually had a hole in her heart, so she had to take medication from a young age. She was known to sometimes be a jokester, but was mainly quiet, often found drawing, dancing, or reading Archie comic books. She was also very strong-willed, which is something her mother taught all of her children. There was also the story I read about how much Roberta was a jokester because she would go over to her father, Ernie, and tell him, "Hey, Ernie, where's Bert?" But she wasn't just playful and joking like that. She also seemed to be incredibly caring and nurturing. It was said when her family members were sick, she would always help nurse them back to health. An article I read in Vice reading, and I quote, "Growing up in northern Alberta in the 1960s and 70s, the children were often the targets of hatred and discrimination because of their darker skin. But their mother never simply accepted this, and neither did her kids." Her sister Carol saying, and I quote, "We stuck up for ourselves. If we had to fight, we did." End quote. When Roberta was only 14 years old, her mother would end up passing away due to medical issues. So she moved in with her older sisters, Carol and Marilyn, in Edmonton. A while later, she would end up moving in with her older sister, Verl, in Surrey, British Columbia. By the summer of 1988, Roberta was finishing high school, and she also was dating a boy at the time that she was planning on marrying. But sadly, neither of those things would end up happening. Because on August 24th of 1988, Roberta, her niece, cousin, and a few friends decided to go camping to celebrate the end of summer work-study program they'd attended. The group was staying at the Sunnyside campground on Cultus Lake, about an hour east of Surrey. Around 8 p.m. that evening, Roberta ended up developing a fever, and she also got her period. And she was kind of just over camping at that point, and she wanted to go home. Which honestly, same girl. That sounds like an awful combination to have while camping. So it's said that Roberta ended up rolling up her black pants to her knees, put on a pair of octagon-shaped sunglasses, took her army green backpack, and waved goodbye to her niece before leaving and heading off to hitchhike home. The morning of August 26th, Roberta's sister Carol decided to drive 15 hours from Alberta down to British Columbia, where the rest of her sisters were living, so she could go visit. She left Fairview, Alberta, and ended up calling around 2 hours into her trip while she was passing through Dawson's Creek, British Columbia. However, when she ended up making this call, she would end up finding out that Roberta hadn't been seen for days, and that she had never made it home after leaving that campsite. After this, the family attempted to call the police to report Roberta missing. However, police didn't really seem to take it seriously because they said Roberta was an adult. She hadn't been missing for 48 hours at this point, so they didn't want to open a case, which is honestly ridiculous. And apparently, even back then, it wasn't the rule. Police just kind of seemed to make it up on their own and just say, well, we don't want to do this paperwork and we don't want to file this person missing and look for them right now because they're probably just off somewhere because they're an adult. Again, just so ridiculous in my opinion that we hear this happening so often. Roberta's sister Verl saying, and I quote, "She was hitchhiking home because she wanted to go home, and that's when they took her." End quote. And that is because around this time when Roberta ended up leaving the campsite, she would end up walking to the main road there. A witness would report seeing a girl matching Roberta's description walking along the side of the highway there, near the intersection of Vetter Mountain and Cultus Lake roads. This witness would also watch as a red sports car pulled alongside where Roberta was walking and began talking to Roberta. The witness described the man as being of average height with blonde to light brown hair and a prominent jawline. The witness also reported, though, that the girl, who was seemingly Roberta, ended up backing away as if she was scared when this man pulled over and tried to talk to her. Now let's pause, because this red sports car is something that we've also heard about in a complete other case that I've covered. The disappearance of 15-year-old Delphine Nikal. Delphine was last thought to have hitchhiked from a gas station in Smithers, British Columbia in 1990, where a witness would last seen Delphine getting into a red sports car. There's the thing. Roberta disappeared in 1988, and then Delphine would disappear 2 years later in 1990. Both were young women of indigenous descent who decided to hitchhike and were last seen getting into or with a red sports car. However, I think it's also important to note that Smithers and the campground are over 1,000 kilometers from each other on complete opposite ends of British Columbia. As we talk about a lot with the Highway of Tears, which Smithers actually is part of the direct part of Highway of Tears, there are just one too many missing and murdered Indigenous women along this highway, and just in Canada in general. But it makes me wonder, how coincidental could it be that just 2 years apart in the late 80s to early 90s, could there be two missing Indigenous women from British Columbia that were last seen with someone with this red sports car? And it makes me wonder, could there have been a serial killer operating along the Highway of Tears or just in British Columbia in general that drove a red sports car? I mean, honestly, it would be a good guise. Would someone look at someone that may be seemingly rich? A handsome young man driving a sports car would be less scary, than an older, scruffy-looking man pulling over in a pickup truck or something, or a white van. Maybe these girls felt comfortable getting into his vehicle because he was, quite attractive, possibly, blonde hair, nice jawline, drove a pretty sports car. Maybe that made them feel more comfortable, and so they got in. Honestly, it's pretty despicable if that's what was happening. Why would police want to look at a possibly rich young man or rich middle-aged man even driving a sports car as being the person that is killing all of these women or kidnapping them possibly? It's usually not what police look towards. It's usually not what people suspect, especially back then if it was a young, attractive white male. We've seen with the Bruce MacArthur case in Toronto where police literally let him go multiple times because they said he looked like a nice guy or seemed like a nice guy. So who's to say that even if they did suspect this person for some reason or another, which I have never heard this person talked about before, this red sports car individual that I've now heard in 2 cases now, who's to say if they even were to look into this person that they didn't just think, he's rich, he has better things to do than to kidnap women? It really makes me wonder. Why hasn't this ever been talked about? Why are there 2 cases, 2 years apart, of young Indigenous women getting in to red sports cars or being approached by a red sports car when they're last seen? That's just too coincidental to me. That's just way too specific. But what I want to know is what you think. Have you heard of any other cases involving red sports cars? Because I tried to do a Google search of missing and murdered Indigenous women, red sports car, anything like that, and nothing pops up. Neither of these cases pop up. Not Roberta's, not Delphine's. So is this information just so minute and minuscule and no one's talking about these cases specifically that information just hasn't been connected yet? Or doesn't mean nothing? But I just find it so strange that there could be 2 cases 2 years apart of missing Indigenous girls that were last seen with red sports cars. That's just too specific. It's so strange to me. And have you ever heard of this? Do you think there's something to this? We've seen with the Picton family that they seemingly had quite a bit of money. They had a huge farm, they had police officers and parties and all of this stuff on their land all the time. And it took so long for them to be caught. It makes me wonder, is there or was there some other rich young man out there that was doing a similar thing and was just never caught? Still be alive and active out there to this day if he was young enough back in the late 80s to early 90s. He wouldn't be that old nowadays. He could still be out there right now. And could this red sports car honestly be connected to even more cases than we even know about? It really makes me wonder. And another thing I think is important to talk about is, unlike a lot of these cases with, rebellious teens or addicts or people living high-risk lifestyles, Roberta wasn't like that. Roberta was just a very sweet girl all around, it seems like. She was a very good girl. She didn't party, she didn't do drugs, she didn't do all of this kind of nefarious activity as some people do that we talk about, which again, their cases are still as important, they're still people. But Roberta in this case, I think it's specifically interesting to look at. She didn't live that kind of high-risk lifestyle. However, she did what a lot of people did back then, and I still hear people talking about doing today, and she hitchhiked, which is a high-risk activity. She decided to hitchhike that day because she wasn't feeling good, she didn't want to be stuck in the woods anymore, and then she disappeared. Now, I'm sure all of you are asking because, she ended up disappearing very close to where Robert Pickton, operated. Could he have been involved in her disappearance? Well, it seems like her family ended up giving the police a DNA sample from Roberta, and it was compared to evidence found at the Pickton farm. However, Roberta's DNA didn't match anything that they did collect. In the early 2000s, new hope would end up resurfacing when a man in jail named Terry Arnold ended up admitting that he was the last person with Roberta. Terry was actually in jail because he was convicted of the murder of Barbara Stoppel in Winnipeg in 1981. He has also essayed 4 girls in Newfoundland and was also suspected in another murder in Alberta. So just all around an awful individual. But Terry, unfortunately, would end up unaliving himself. So if he did have any answers, we may never know if he was actually involved. Makes me wonder, did Terry drive a red sports car? Very curious. Roberta's sister Carol would go on to say, and I quote, "The thing I don't understand is why her friends didn't take her to the bus station." End quote. Let's take one more good look at Shae-Lynn and her great aunt Roberta, just in case someone out there has information that we don't know about. Maybe it'll spark something in someone's memory. Shae-Lynn is described as an indigenous woman standing 5'11", 150 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. She has multiple tattoos, including birth dates, are tattooed on both her forearms, and a red and green rose tattoo on the back of her right leg. Her great aunt Roberta was also said to be of indigenous descent, with long black hair, brown or black eyes, standing 5'4" and around 120 pounds. She was last seen wearing dirty white sneakers, octagon-shaped sunglasses, black pants, a navy blue tank top, and was carrying an army green backpack. Now, what I want to know is how you feel about both these cases. Do you have any information on them that I didn't talk about or know about? Let's chat about that down in the description. And what I really want to know is, what do you guys think about this connection with the red sports car? It is something that really blew my mind when I came across it, and I had to pause and literally sit there, and I was like, no way. No way is this red sports car mentioned again in one of these cases, which is, again, something that I always talk about. I think the more these cases are talked about and spread and more people find out about them, the bigger chance we have of trying to solve them, or someone coming forward, or someone knowing something. I have so many people commenting and telling me that they've never heard of some of these cases before, and they live in that area. And that's mind-blowing to me. It's mind-blowing to me that these cases aren't talked about, even if they are old, because they're not solved yet. So we need to continue to talk about them and keep them alive. And it makes me wonder, is that how this red sports car has just not been talked about yet? Because just none of these cases have been connected. Again, I don't know if there's a connection. It's just so strange to me. Very strange. But again, I would love to know what you all think. And I think the number one thing we can learn from these cases is just please don't hitchhike. Please don't hitchhike. Again, people keep telling me that it still happens in small towns today, and the risk is just too high, unfortunately. You don't know who you're getting it with, because it is just so unfortunate that someone could be taken advantage of like that because they're just trying to get somewhere. If there are any cases you want me to look into and cover, let me know down below, and I will add them to my list. But as always, I hope you all stay safe out there. Please lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.